Most people assume Europeans have always looked the way they look now. That pale skin, light eyes, and light hair are simply what happens when people live for thousands of years in cold, gray, northern climates. It sounds reasonable. It fits the map. And it is almost entirely wrong. For the first 40,000 years of human life in Europe, every person on that continent had dark skin. The pale complexion we now associate with Northern Europe did not exist there. It had not yet arrived. The question is not where white people came from. The question is why it took so long, tens of thousands of years of living in northern latitudes, for them to appear at all. And the answer is stranger than most people expect. The people who eventually reach Europe do not set out for Europe. They are following game, following water, and following the logic of survival across a landscape that has no borders and no name. They move out of Africa and into the Levant, then east across the Iranian plateau, then slowly, generation by generation, northward and westward, into territory that no human being has ever seen. They are dark-skinned. Every human being alive at this point is dark-skinned. This is not a coincidence or a regional trait. It is the baseline condition of the species. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans have lived close to the equator, under intense ultraviolet radiation, and dark skin is the body's answer to that radiation. Melanin absorbs UV light before it can damage the folate that reproduction depends on. The more UV, the more melanin. It is a straightforward equation written into the genome across deep time. What happens when those people move north is not straightforward. The assumption, reasonable, intuitive, and largely wrong, is that lighter skin follows automatically. Less sun, less UV, less need for heavy melanin protection, and so the skin lightens. Simple. Except it does not happen. Not for thousands of years. Not until something specific changes. And that something is not the climate. The key is vitamin D. Skin does two things that matter here. It blocks UV radiation with melanin, and it uses UV radiation to synthesize vitamin D. In high UV environments, blocking is the priority. In low UV environments, synthesis becomes critical because vitamin D deficiency is debilitating. It weakens bones, suppresses immunity, disrupts reproduction. The conventional story says that northern latitudes select for lighter skin because lighter skin produces more vitamin D in weak sunlight. And that is true, but it is only half the story. The other half is food. Vitamin D is not only made in the skin, it is also absorbed from diet. Oily fish, organ meats, animal liver, the fat of marine mammals. All of them are dense with it. A population eating these foods regularly does not depend on skin synthesis to meet its vitamin D needs. It is getting what it needs through its stomach, not through its epidermis. And the people moving into Ice Age Europe are eating exactly these foods. They are hunter-gatherers in one of the richest hunting environments the world has ever produced. The mammoth steppe stretches from Western Europe to the Pacific coast of Asia. A vast, cold, productive grassland carrying herds of woolly mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, reindeer, wild horse, and bison in numbers that are difficult to imagine from a modern vantage point. These people are not scratching for calories. They are harvesting large animals regularly, eating liver and marrow and fat alongside the muscle meat. And their diet is delivering vitamin D in quantities that make skin-based synthesis largely unnecessary. This is the reason dark skin persists at northern latitudes for tens of thousands of years. Not because the selective pressure for lighter skin does not exist, it does weakly, but because the dietary buffer is strong enough to absorb it. The pressure has to become overwhelming before it drives real change in the genome. And it will not become overwhelming until the diet changes, until the meat and fish give way to grain. That shift is 40,000 years away. For now, Dark-skinned people are moving into Europe, and they are doing fine. By around 45,000 years ago, modern humans are in Europe. Not in large numbers. The continent is vast, the climate is cold, and the populations moving through it are small, mobile bands spread thin across an enormous landscape. But they are here, and they are the first of our kind to be here. They are called the Aurignacian people, named for a site in southern France where their tools were first identified. But the label is an archaeological convenience. The people themselves have no such name for who they are. They are simply the people, the ones who know how to read this particular stretch of land, who know where the reindeer cross the river in autumn, who know which sheltered valleys stay livable when the winds come down from the north. Europe at this moment is not the Europe of the map. The coastlines sit further out. Sea levels are lower because vast quantities of water are locked in ice sheets to the north. Britain is not an island. The North Sea does not exist. A broad plain of grassland and marsh, later called Doggerland, connects what is now eastern England to what is now Denmark and the Netherlands. The continent is larger, colder, and more open than anything alive today resembles. They are not alone when they arrive. The Neanderthals have been in Europe for hundreds of thousands of years. A different human species, cold-adapted, heavily built, intelligent in their own right. For several thousand years, both populations share the continent. Not in the same camps, not in the same valleys necessarily, but in overlapping ranges, aware of each other, occasionally meeting. What those meetings looked like is largely lost. What the genetics show is that they were sometimes close enough to have children together. A small fraction of Neanderthal DNA survives in every non-African human alive today, including these people. But the Neanderthals are declining. They have been declining for some time before modern humans arrive, reduced by climate fluctuations and shrinking ranges. The arrival of modern humans accelerates the process. Whether through direct competition for resources, displacement from the best hunting grounds, or something else, the result is the same. By around 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals are gone. Europe belongs entirely to modern humans for the first time in its history. The world these people inhabit is cold by any modern standard, but rich beyond almost any modern comparison. The mammoth steppe, the great grassland ecosystem stretching from Western Europe deep into Asia, supports megafauna in extraordinary abundance, woolly mammoths in herds, cave lions moving through the birch scrub at the forest margins, cave bears occupying the deep limestone caverns that these people also want for shelter, which makes certain negotiations unavoidable, woolly rhinoceros. Giant deer with antler spans wider than a person is tall. The landscape is dangerous and dense with food simultaneously. These people are physically robust, taller on average than the farming populations that will come later, with heavier bones built by childhoods of high protein intake and constant physical demand. They are not the stooped and shambling figures of older imagination. They stand straight, move fast, and carry in their heads a detailed map of hundreds of square kilometers of terrain. Every water source, every seasonal migration route, every stone outcrop worth returning to for tool material. Their skin is dark. This point bears repeating because it runs so contrary to what people expect when they think about Ice Age Europeans. The ancient DNA recovered from their bones is unambiguous on this. The genetic variants associated with lighter skin are largely absent. These are dark-skinned people, as dark as populations living in Africa and South Asia today, living in the forests and grasslands of France and Spain and Germany and the Russian plain. Their eyes are a different matter. Among the Western hunter-gatherer populations of Europe, light eye color is already present, and in some populations already common. The genetic variant that produces blue eyes arose once in a single individual at some point during or before this period, and it spread. It spread because eye color, unlike skin color, carries little or no cost under the selective pressures these people face. There is no UV-related penalty for blue eyes. The variant drifts through small populations, reaches high frequency in some groups, and becomes characteristic of the Western hunter-gatherer lineage. Dark skin and light eyes together. It is a combination that surprises people when they first encounter it. When the ancient DNA results for Cheddar Man or for other Western hunter-gatherer individuals come back with that pairing, it surprises people because they assume the traits travel together, not that they are part of the same package. They are not. They are genetically independent, shaped by entirely different selective pressures, and for tens of thousands of years, Europeans carry one without the other. These people move across the full breadth of the continent, from the Atlantic coast of Iberia in the west to the Russian plain in the east. The same broad genetic ancestry, the Western hunter-gatherer lineage, covers Europe. There are regional differences, population clusters, groups that have been separated long enough to diverge slightly. But the underlying similarity is striking. A person from a band in what is now southwestern France and a person from a band in what is now Moravia would look broadly alike, carry broadly similar tools, and share a broadly similar relationship with the landscape. And their technology is not simple. The blade tools of the Aurignacian tradition require a precise understanding of stone fracture mechanics, the ability to predict how a particular piece of flint will behave under pressure, to strike it at exactly the angle needed to detach a long, thin blade rather than a formless chunk. It takes years to learn. It is not a skill that can be improvised. It is taught, practiced, and refined across generations, the same way any demanding craft is transmitted in any society. They also make things that serve no survival purpose in any narrow sense. Personal ornaments, perforated shells, animal teeth, carved ivory beads appear in the archaeological record from the earliest Aurignacian layers. Pigment, primarily red ochre, is carried and used. Flutes made from bird bone and mammoth ivory produce music in the fire-lit darkness of limestone shelters. These are not the behaviors of creatures scraping at the edge of existence. They are the behaviors of people with enough security to invest in meaning. This is the baseline. Dark-skinned, light-eyed in many cases, technologically sophisticated, culturally rich, spread across a continent they have learned to read as fluently as any environment humans have ever inhabited. They will live this way, with variations, with population contractions and expansions driven by climate, with the slow transformation of the landscape around them, for the next 20,000 years. The world they know is about to get considerably harder, but they are not fragile. They have already proven that much. The ice is coming. Not suddenly. Nothing in climate moves suddenly on a human timescale, except when it does, and this period has both. The general trend is toward cold, and the cold will eventually reach an extreme that forces the most dramatic crisis these people have yet faced. But for now, in the middle millennia of this period, the continent is livable from end to end, and the people living here are at the beginning of something that will last far longer than anything that comes after them. In the depths of a European winter, the sun barely clears the horizon. It tracks low across the southern sky for a few hours, pale and distant, and then it is gone. A person standing in what is now central France in January, 40,000 years ago, receives a fraction of the ultraviolet radiation that their ancestors absorbed on the plains of East Africa. And yet their skin is just as dark. The sun has changed. They have not. The reason is in what they are eating. The night before, they cracked open the femur of a reindeer they brought down 2 days earlier and scooped out the marrow, dense, fatty, rich, in ways their bodies recognized without needing to name. The liver went first, divided among the group while it was still warm. The fat around the kidneys was rendered down and stored. Nothing was wasted, and nothing needed to be, because what came from a single large animal was enough to sustain a band of 12 people for days. That marrow, that liver, that organ fat, they are doing something invisible and essential, delivering into the body the same compound that pale northern skin would otherwise have to manufacture from weak winter sunlight. Vitamin D, though these people have no word for it, no concept of it as a separate thing. They only know that they are strong, that their bones hold, that their children grow. They do not know why, and they do not need to. Darker skin evolved close to the equator as a shield, absorbing ultraviolet radiation before it could damage the chemistry that reproduction depends on. That shielding comes at a cost in weaker sunlight, where the same UV that needs to be blocked at the equator needs to be let through in the north to drive processes the body cannot do without. The people living in Ice Age Europe are carrying a shield they no longer need quite as urgently, but losing it takes generations of pressure. And the pressure here is weak, because the food is doing the job the sun cannot. Consider the alternative. A person eating grain, wheat, barley, the stripped-down staples of farming, gets almost none of this from their food. No liver, no marrow, no oily fish. Their diet is calorie-dense but nutritionally narrow, and the compound their bones and immunity depend on is simply not in it. For that person, at a northern latitude, in weak winter light, dark skin becomes a liability. The body needs every photon of UV it can absorb. The selective pressure for lighter skin becomes acute, urgent, and fast. That person does not exist yet. The farmers are thousands of years away. For now, everyone in Europe is hunting, and they are hunting well. A band working together can bring down animals many times their size, driving them into bogs, over cliffs, ambushing them at river crossings. The return is enormous. A woolly mammoth yields hundreds of kilograms of meat, fat, and organ tissue. A reindeer yields less, but costs less to take. Either way, the diet is rich in exactly the compounds that make lighter skin unnecessary. The Inuit, living at the edge of the Arctic thousands of years later, will demonstrate the same principle. At latitudes where winter sunlight almost disappears entirely, their skin remains considerably darker than that of modern northern Europeans. Their traditional diet, seal, walrus, whale, fish, is so dense in dietary vitamin D that their bodies simply do not need to synthesize it from skin exposure. The latitude demands lighter skin. The food makes it unnecessary. The Ice Age Europeans are not Inuit. Different continent, different specific prey, different precise circumstances. But the logic running through their lives is the same. The food is the buffer. As long as large animals are abundant and the hunting holds, the pressure for lighter skin stays manageable, real but slow, and easily outpaced by the stability of a genome that has been dark for hundreds of thousands of years. None of this is visible to the people living it. A woman butchering a horse on a riverbank in what will one day be the Dordogne is not thinking about ultraviolet radiation or selective pressure. She is thinking about the cut, about the cold in her fingers, about the children waiting back at the shelter. Her skin is dark and has always been dark, and she has no reason to imagine it could be otherwise. She is simply alive and fed and doing the work that keeps both of those things true. The diet that changes everything has not been invented yet. The grain fields, the domesticated cattle, and the slow narrowing of the human menu that will eventually strip the buffer away. All of that is 40,000 years in the future. For now, the mammoth steppe is full. The hunts are good, and the people moving across this cold, enormous continent carry their dark skin north with them as naturally as they carry everything else. What will undo it is not the cold. It is not the latitude. It is not the gray winters or the low winter sun. It is hunger of a specific kind, the nutritional hunger of a population that has traded the richness of a hunter's diet for the reliable but narrow calories of a farmer's field. When that trade happens, the bodies of the people who made it will begin, slowly and then quickly, to change. But the trade has not happened yet. For now, the fires burn low in the limestone shelters of southwestern Europe, and the people sleeping around them are dark-skinned and well-nourished, and they do not know and cannot know what their descendants will eventually become. The cold does not arrive like a storm. It comes over generations, winters that do not fully release, summers that shorten by days, then weeks, decade by decade, until the rhythm of the year that people's grandparents knew is simply gone. By around 25,000 years ago, the ice sheets that have been building across the north have reached their greatest extent. Everything above what is now central France is, or will become, unlivable. The world that the first Europeans spread across so confidently is shrinking. In the north, the land empties. Not at once. People hold on in places longer than the cold would seem to allow, following the last herds up valleys that still carry enough grass to graze, sheltering in river gorges that trap a little more warmth than the plains above them. But the math of survival eventually wins. The hunting grounds that once sustained a band cannot sustain them anymore. They move south, or their children do, or their grandchildren. By the height of the ice, no one is living above the 50th parallel. An enormous swathe of Europe, everything that is now Germany, Poland, the Low Countries, Britain, is empty of people. What remains is the southwest. The valleys of southern France and northern Spain, the Dordogne, the Vézère, the Cantabrian coast, become the refuge of what is left of the European human population. Estimates suggest the total number of people surviving on the entire continent at this point numbers somewhere between a few thousand and perhaps 100,000. The uncertainty is wide. What is not uncertain is that they are compressed into a narrow band of livable territory, crowded together in a way their ancestors never were, thrown into contact with groups they might never have met in a wider world. The valleys are rich enough to sustain them. Reindeer move through in enormous herds on their seasonal migrations, predictable, huntable, yielding meat and hide and bone in quantities that can carry a group through the worst of winter. Wild horse grazes the open ground between the river valleys. Ibex pick their way along the limestone cliffs. Cave lion and cave hyena compete with the humans for the same prey, on which means every successful hunt carries the risk of losing what you have just taken to something larger and faster than you are. It is in these valleys, in this compressed and dangerous world, that the art appears. The caves at Chauvet in the Ardèche, their walls covered in lions, rhinoceroses, bears, and mammoths, rendered with a confidence and technique that still stops people cold when they see them, were painted during the early part of this period, around 36,000 years ago. The caves at Lascaux, further west in the Dordogne, were painted closer to the end of it, around 17,000 years ago. Between those two dates, across 20,000 years of cold and compression and survival, the people sheltering in the valleys of southwestern Europe were going into the deep chambers of limestone mountains and painting the world they knew. The paintings are not casual. The deepest chambers of Chauvet are hundreds of meters from the entrance, accessible only through passages so narrow that the person carrying the lamp had to turn sideways. Getting there required planning, preparation, light sources, and a specific intention. The people who made these images were not doodling on a convenient surface. They were doing something deliberate in a place that demanded effort to reach, by the flickering light of fat-burning lamps that cast the animals on the walls into movement every time the flame shifted. The artists were dark-skinned, their hands pressed against the limestone to leave the stenciled outlines that appear in cave after cave, belonged to people whose genomes show none of the variants for lighter skin that will arrive in Europe thousands of years later. They had, and in many cases, light eyes. The combination is documented plainly in what their bones preserve. Dark skin, and in some cases, eyes that caught the lamplight in colors their modern descendants would recognize. That is the face pressing its palm to the cold cave wall in the Dordogne 20,000 years ago. Outside the caves, the business of staying alive continues. Winter in the refugia of southwestern France is severe. Temperatures well below freezing, snowfall that closes the high ground for months at a time. The people living here have clothing that works, layered hide garments sewn with bone needles and sinew thread, tailored close enough to the body to trap warmth, waterproofed by the smoking process used in the curing. They have fire, reliably. They have shelters built against the limestone overhangs that the river valleys provide in abundance. Not caves in the deep sense, but shallow rock shelters open at the front, big enough for a family group, out of the wind and the worst of the wet. The compression of the population into these valleys does something to culture that open, dispersed populations rarely experience. When people who might otherwise never have met are thrown together season after season, ideas travel. Techniques spread. A better way of hafting a blade, a new approach to preparing hide, a particular way of representing the flank of a horse on limestone. All of these move through a population that is, by the standards of hunter-gatherer life, unusually dense and unusually connected. The explosion of artistic sophistication visible in the cave art of this period is not a coincidence. It is what happens when knowledge has nowhere else to go but inward and upward. The megafauna are still here: woolly mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, cave lion, cave bear, all of them still moving through the same landscape as the people, still hunted or competed with, or simply coexisted alongside. But the pressure on these animals is building. The cold has compressed their ranges as it has compressed the human population. The herds are smaller than they were. The hunting is harder. The relationship between the people and the animals that have sustained them for 40,000 years is changing in ways that neither can perceive, but that are irreversible. A child growing up in the Dordogne Valley around 18,000 BCE knows a world that is, by any measure, complete. She knows the seasonal movements of the reindeer, the months when the salmon run in the rivers, the particular qualities of the flint from the outcrop 3 days' walk to the east that makes it worth the trip. She knows the stories told around the fire in winter, the ones that carry knowledge about the landscape, the animals, the obligations between people. She does not know that the cold is beginning very slowly to release. She does not know that the world her grandchildren inherit will look nothing like the one she was born into. The ice has been the defining fact of human life in Europe for 20,000 years. The people who lived within it did not experience it as a catastrophe. It was simply the world that shaped their skills, their bodies, their art, their movement across the land. They were not waiting for it to end. They were living fully inside it. But it is ending. The same slow arithmetic that built the ice sheets is now, almost imperceptibly, beginning to reverse. Summers that are fractionally warmer, winters that release fractionally sooner, the glacier at the edge of the world retreating by feet, then yards, then miles. The people in the valleys of southwestern France do not know this yet. Their grandchildren will begin to suspect it. Their great-grandchildren will watch the world transform around them in ways that no story their ancestors told has prepared them for. The long cold is nearly over. What comes next will change everything. And the people who carry Europe through to the other side of the ice will carry their dark skin with them, into a warmer world that is about to become unrecognizable. All of them, still dark, still here. The ice finally begins to go. The world after it will be a different world entirely, and eventually, after changes none of these people can imagine, it will produce the pale-skinned Northern Europeans that the modern imagination associates with this deep Ice Age past. But that is thousands of years away yet, and it will require people who have not yet arrived in Europe at all. For now, the fires burn in the rock shelters of the Dordogne. The animals move on the cave walls. The people who painted them sleep in their hide clothing, dark-skinned and alive, at the edge of an ice age that is, at last, releasing its grip on the world. In the forests of what is now northern Spain, a man is tracking deer through the undergrowth at first light. His eyes, pale, if the color of shallow water, move across the ground without hurry. A print in the soft earth, a broken stem. The way the moss has been pressed in a direction that tells him which way the animal turned and how long ago. He learned to read this the way he learned everything, by watching, then doing again, until the knowledge lived in his hands and eyes rather than in any conscious thought. His skin is dark. His eyes are not. The two things sit on his face together as naturally as his nose and his jaw, because in his world they have always gone together. There is no one in his band, no one in any band he has ever encountered who looks fundamentally different from this. Dark skin and pale eyes is not a combination anyone here has a word for. It is not a combination. It is just a face. The pale eye variant arrived in Western Europe as the ice retreated, carried by populations moving northward and westward into the land the glaciers had released. It spread quickly through the small, connected bands of hunter-gatherers repopulating the continent. Not because it made anyone stronger or faster or better at surviving the cold, but because, in small populations, chance moves things. A trait that costs nothing and loses nothing can reach everyone within a few generations simply by traveling through the right lineages at the right time. There was no cost to it. Dark eyes and pale eyes see the same world with the same clarity. Neither is better in firelight or forest shadow or the flat gray light of a northern winter morning. The variant drifted into the population and stayed the way neutral things do. And by the time the post-glacial forests of Western Europe are fully established, it is simply part of who these people are. Fixed, universal, unremarked. Around the fire at night, the pale eyes catch the light differently from dark ones. A flash of reflection when someone turns their head. A quality of presence in the firelit dark. The children sleeping closest to the warmth, the elders talking in low voices about tomorrow's movement, the young men on the outer edge of the group watching the tree line, all of them with the same eyes, the same dark skin, the same faces that no one here has ever thought to describe because there is nothing to describe. This is what people look like. This is what people have always looked like. Skin color and eye color are not connected. They never were. They are governed by different genes and shaped by different pressures, and they move through populations independently of each other. The dark skin of these people is held in place by the diet that makes lighter skin unnecessary, the meat and fat and organ food that delivers what the weak northern sun cannot. The pale eyes are held in place by nothing except the fact that they are already everywhere. One trait is functional. The other is, in survival terms, simply along for the ride. The man tracking deer in the Spanish forest does not know that the farmers are coming. He does not know that within a few thousand years, people carrying different genes and a completely different way of living will move into this landscape and begin to change it beyond recognition. He does not know that those people will carry the variants for lighter skin that his genome lacks, thus and that their arrival will begin the long process of assembling the modern European appearance out of pieces that are not yet in the same place. He knows the deer turned left at the stream crossing. He knows the weather is changing by the way the wind has shifted in the last hour. He knows where the band camped last night and how far he has come since before dawn. His pale eyes move across the forest floor with the complete attention of someone whose life depends on seeing clearly. The ice is gone. The world is full of food. And he looks nothing like what most people imagine when they imagine the ancient Europeans who once lived here. He is what they actually looked like, dark-skinned, pale-eyed, alive in a forested world that his descendants will inhabit for thousands of years before anything changes. The face that built Ice Age Europe, now that survived the glacial maximum in the valleys of the Southwest, that repopulated the continent as the cold released. This is it. This is the baseline. Everything that comes after is addition, not replacement of something that was always pale. The light eyes were already there. They were just wearing a different face than the one the modern imagination expects. The reindeer are gone, not all at once. They have been thinning for generations, retreating northward as the cold that sustained the great herds of the mammoth steppe slowly releases its grip on the continent. A hunter who learned his craft following reindeer across the open ground of southwestern France finds, as he ages, that the ground is no longer open. Trees are coming. Birch first, then pine, then hazel and oak filling in behind, closing off the long sight lines that made the old hunting possible. The world he was born into is becoming unrecognizable within a single lifetime. It is not a catastrophe. It is an adjustment, a large one, demanding and disorienting, but the people making it are the descendants of people who survived the worst cold the continent has ever produced. They know how to read land. They know how to find food in conditions that would be opaque to anyone who had not spent a childhood learning them. The forest is harder to hunt in than the open steppe. It is also full of things to eat, if you know what you are looking at. Red deer move through the new woodland in smaller groups than the old reindeer herds, harder to intercept, requiring a different approach. Wild boar root through the undergrowth, dangerous, unpredictable, yet worth the risk for the fat they carry. Aurochs, the great wild cattle, shoulder height to a tall man, with horns spanning wider than a person's outstretched arms, graze the clearings at forest edges and come to the rivers to drink at dusk. The hunters who once ran down reindeer on open ground are learning, season by season, how to move silently through trees. The rivers are where the world is richest. Salmon run them in numbers that are difficult to convey. The water dark with fish in the right season, the air above the surface alive with birds coming for the same thing the people have come for. Eels, pike, the rich pickings of a riverbank at the height of spring, when everything is moving and reproducing and the whole landscape is generating food faster than it can be consumed. The people working these rivers are not struggling. They are harvesting. Along the coasts, the shoreline is moving. Sea levels are rising as the ice melts, slowly over centuries, but persistently enough that camps established a generation ago sometimes flood in the worst storms and eventually do not drain. The people living on these coasts are pulling shellfish from the rocks, netting fish in the shallow bays, hunting seabirds on the cliff tops. The middens they leave behind, great mounds of shell and bone, will persist for thousands of years. The accumulated evidence of people who knew every tide pattern and seasonal run on a coastline. They had worked for generations. A band of 20 to 30 people moves through this world in a pattern shaped by what the land offers and when. Spring on the rivers for the fish runs, and summer inland for the deer and the berries and the hazelnuts coming ripe in the new forests. Autumn on the coast before the worst weather. Winter in sheltered valleys with stored food and the knowledge that the lean months are finite. The pattern is not rigid. Weather and luck and the unpredictability of animal movement mean that every year requires improvisation, but it is deeply known, calibrated over generations to the specific rhythms of a specific piece of country. These people cover enormous distances on foot. A territory might span 100 kilometers from one end to the other, and every part of it is known, not just in the sense of having been visited, but in the sense of being understood. Which slopes hold snow longest in spring, which streams run year-round, and which dry up in summer. Where the flint outcrops are, certain in which ones produce stone that holds an edge and which ones fracture unpredictably. The land is not a backdrop. It is a library, and they have been reading it their whole lives. Their tools are smaller now than the great blades of the Ice Age. Microliths, tiny, precisely shaped flint components, some no larger than a thumbnail, are hafted in rows into wooden handles and bone shafts to make composite cutting tools, arrows, and spears. When a single component breaks, it is replaced without discarding the whole weapon. It is a technology built for a world where materials must be carried across long distances and nothing can be wasted, and it is extraordinarily effective within those constraints. Between bands, connections are maintained across the full breadth of the continent. Objects move, particular types of shell, and particular colors of ochre, particular stone from sources hundreds of kilometers away, carried through exchange networks that link people who may never meet directly, but who are connected through chains of relationship and obligation. A piece of Baltic amber in a burial in southern France is not a mystery. It is a trace of a network that ran the length of Europe, maintained by people who understood that connection across distance was as essential to survival as any practical skill. They are dark-skinned, these people, working the rivers and forests and coastlines of a post-glacial Europe. Dark skin, and in most cases, pale eyes, the combination that defined the Western hunter-gatherer lineage from the Atlantic coast to the plains of Eastern Europe. Tall and robust, yet physically demanding lives written into heavier bones and more pronounced muscle attachments than the farming populations that will come after them. To a modern eye, encountering one of them on a riverbank or at the edge of a forest clearing, the surprise would not be how different they look. It would be how present they look, how completely at home in a world that, from the outside, seems barely livable. To the east, the continent is already changing. The farmers of Anatolia have been moving westward for generations, clearing forest, planting grain, bringing with them a way of living that will reach this corner of Europe eventually. But the forests of Western Europe are still full and uncleared, the rivers still running clear, the deer still moving through the undergrowth in the early morning. The people who have lived here for 40,000 years are at the height of what they know how to do. The world they are about to lose is, right now, at its fullest. They do not know it is about to be lost. They know the names of the rivers and the hills and the particular qualities of the light in different seasons. They know each other, and they know the land, and for now, that is enough. The farmers are still a long way off. The steppe people are further still. The pale skin and the light hair that the modern imagination places at the beginning of European history have not yet arrived in Europe at all. The continent, at this moment, belongs entirely to people who look nothing like what it will eventually produce. And they are, by any measure, flourishing. This is Europe at its oldest continuous human expression. To dark-skinned people in a forested world, reading it fluently, living inside it completely, unaware that anything is coming that will change it forever. There is a man buried in a cave in Somerset, in what is now southwest England. He died around 10,000 years ago, somewhere in his 20s, and the cold and the limestone held him well enough that when he was found nearly a century ago, his skeleton was almost complete. His name given to him long after his death as Cheddar Man. and what his bones eventually told us collapsed, quietly and permanently, the assumption that pale skin is the ancient European baseline. He was not pale. The genetic variants that produce lighter skin in modern European populations are simply absent from his genome. He carried none of them, not the variants that came with the Anatolian farmers, not the ones that arrived later with the steppe migrations. His skin was dark, probably somewhere in the range of skin tones common today in populations from sub-Saharan Africa to the Arab world. The exact shade is genuinely uncertain. What is certain is that he looked nothing like the people who live in Somerset today. He is not a special case. Across Western and Central Europe, from Iberia to the Hungarian plain, the picture that comes back from individual after individual is the same. The light skin variants are absent. The people who hunted through the forests of post-glacial Europe, who worked the rivers and the coastal middens, who buried their dead with care and ochre and the occasional grave good, all of them dark-skinned, and carrying a genome that had not yet acquired the changes that produce the modern Northern European appearance. The eye color is more variable. The blue eye variant, present at high frequency across the Western hunter-gatherer populations of Western and Northern Europe, is absent or rare in the hunter-gatherer populations further east, in Ukraine, in the Iron Gates region of the Danube, in some of the Scandinavian individuals who carry a different mixture of ancestries. The pale eyes are not universal even among hunter-gatherers. They are characteristic of the Western lineage specifically, the people who repopulated Europe from refugia in the southwest after the last glacial maximum. What this means for the timeline is specific and important. The modern Northern European appearance, pale skin, light eyes, with light hair together, did not exist in Europe during the Ice Age. It did not exist in the forests of the post-glacial Mesolithic. The earliest piece of it, the blue eyes, was present in some populations from around 14,000 years ago onward. The skin lightening came later, carried into Europe by the Anatolian farmers beginning around 7,000 years ago. The final assembly of the full combination would not be complete for thousands of years after that. The people who painted Lascaux had dark skin. The people who worked the salmon rivers of Mesolithic Europe had dark skin. The people who built the shell middens on the Atlantic coast, who traded amber and ochre across continental distances, who buried their dead with more care than the popular imagination credits them with. All of them dark, yet carrying for tens of thousands of years an appearance that the landscape and the climate they lived in gave them no strong reason to change. They were not waiting to become modern Europeans. They were not an unfinished version of something that would eventually look the way Europe looks today. They were complete, adapted, fully themselves, a people with 40,000 years of accumulated knowledge of a specific landscape, living inside that knowledge with a fluency that the populations replacing them would take generations to develop. Their appearance was part of who they were. The pale Northern European of popular imagination is not their descendant in any simple sense. It is a synthesis of three different populations, assembled from ingredients that had not yet arrived, consolidated no earlier than 4,000 years ago. What came next? The farmers from Anatolia, moving westward with their grain and their lighter skin variants, transforming the European landscape and the European genome in ways that none of these people could see coming, is the next part of the story. It is the part where the appearance of Europe begins, slowly and then quickly, to change. But that change is still thousands of years away from the world these people inhabit. Their world is still forested, still rich, still entirely their own. And they are still dark-skinned, still pale-eyed in many cases, still living inside a continent they have known longer than anyone else has known anything. The DNA does not lie. It does not flatter the modern imagination or confirm the assumptions people bring to the deep past. It just tells you what was, And what was, for most of the time humans have lived in Europe, is this: dark-skinned people in a cold, forested world, living and dying and leaving almost no trace except their bones and their ochre, and the questions their genomes are still answering, thousands of years after the last of them walked out of a limestone valley in the Dordogne and into a world that was already changing around them. The pale northern European is coming, but not yet, not for a very long time.